Hi, hello, and welcome back to the HII Method. My name is Jen Hatz. I am the host of the HII Method podcast and also the founder of the HII Method, a holistic, integrative, and innovative approach to assessing and optimizing human health, well-being, and performance. And I'm partnered with Neuroforce One, a human performance company that has been training champions for years, and they offer training and assessments in their facility as well as remote options available. And today we are going through a little bit of a review of the latest Netflix documentary related to health. It is called Hack Your Health, actually. Hack Your Health, Discovering the Secrets of the Gut, which I love the fact that there is now a new documentary on Netflix that focuses on a major topic that I love, but because it also kind of helps me flex a little bit of knowledge here and there, because I can see some real, clear positives that are coming out of this documentary, and also some big gaping problems. So we're going to get to the big problem that I identified of whoa, this is misinformation. So that's going to come in a little bit. First, I want to go through a little review of the positives that came out of this documentary, because I think that the more that we become enlightened and I guess guided down some of these areas that we may not otherwise understand or want to look into, we can only gain that much more knowledge really in general, but then that much more guidance on how to carry out behaviors in our day-to-day life. So this entire documentary about the secrets, quote unquote, of the gut. One of the first things that I love that they highlighted in this documentary is fiber intake. And I'm going to hammer this in because this is something that for years as a dietitian, I've always been really heavily promoting fiber intake beyond what is currently recommended. And that's because, so the recommendations right now for your fiber intake across the board is this range of 28 to 40 grams of fiber per day, depending on males or females, which really just means depending on body size in that respect of how they standardize these recommendations. So those fiber recommendations have been put in place based on previous population studies and trying to correlate how much a typical person is taking in on average based on their health. And so this kind of broad assumption is made around these ranges of what would be, I guess, the most optimal for the majority of the population to have as an intake, because it's correlated to other health benefits that they're, capturing through all this public health data, really. So it's not necessarily specific to the individual and to what it is that you are eating. So just take that with a grain of salt as it is, that these are the recommendations that are being put out there for the population. Now, as the documentary highlighted, they highlighted that as the recommendation and the fact that most people take in far less than that. About 15 grams per day is the typical average if you are eating a typical Western, Americanized diet. So that's obviously, as you can hear, 15 grams compared to anywhere from 28 to 40 is a pretty big gap in what we need to be taking in. But the reality is that what we need to be taking in is even higher than what those recommendations are. And this is something that I've been talking about for years. So I'm excited and glad that they highlighted this, that it's very likely 50 grams plus is how much fiber you would need on a day-to-day basis. So if you think of that range of 28 to 40 grams as the range that is normal, think of it as more than likely you need double that, anywhere from 1.5 to 2 times that coming from your foods. So if you want to know more about fiber and where it comes from, what that means, how you track that, especially if you're tracking calories and macronutrients, how you factor fiber into the equation, you can watch that on another episode that is related specifically to fiber, and you can find that on the HII Method. But so that main point that they put out there on that documentary, I'm like, oh, thank God that thank goodness that I'm not the only one, I'll scream to a brick wall if I have to, that you need to eat more fiber. So thank you, for this documentary. I also love the fact that they walked through a little bit of the physiology of how your gut functions. I mean, we're going to say that with a nice, asterisk there, that it's all through cartoons and animations, and I'm not a big fan of those. I'm not like an animated kind of person. I like to see like a real dissection. So I'm a little bit more like the blood and gore. I want to see like the actual stuff. But so through these different animations and more, very, I guess, generalized descriptions, they're kind of helping to describe the physiology behind the gut. And the big thing that they highlighted, I think, that is a huge benefit for the public to understand is the fact that you have these microbes that live inside your gut, but you also have this mucosal lining that basically coats the inside of your intestines. And this is your own mucus that is part of your own immune system, really, that is helping to protect the lining of your gut and to protect it from, in this case, these microbes that could end up having an effect on you. They can eat away at that lining. They can then start to have a negative effect on the actual gut lining itself, the actual gut cell, the cell layer, the tissue cell layer. They can actually start to break that down. And this is where you end up seeing an increase in inflammation because you have this immune response, really. And so that mucosal layer within your GI tract is, I think, a key piece in helping us to understand how to promote our gut health and also how to identify our state of gut health. Because that mucosal lining starts to degrade in response to stress. And what we can use as a biomarker or as an assessment that we can find readily available to us is actually a saliva test to test a certain antibody that is released when that mucosal lining is degraded. So you can actually test this and see for yourself if you are in fact in a state of potential inflammation, potential microbial attack of your intestine, really, that your microbes are eating away at this lining, really in response to overall stress that you are experiencing, whether it's acute or chronic, more than likely chronic. But so that saliva biomarker, it's called salivary SIgA. And so that's the type of antibody that is released because of this mucosal lining being broken down. So that's actually part of your immune system functioning. So I'm glad that they brought up the even just the notion of your mucosal lining, but that little added fact about the saliva biomarker, that came just from yours truly, from the HII Method. So if you're interested in learning more about that saliva biomarker, we also have a blog post that is coming out soon that is going to explain all of that as well. So keep focused on that, or stay tuned for that on the HII Method. And then another thing that they highlighted that I thoroughly appreciated the fact that they highlighted this was the concept of diversity in the diet, and how the more diverse your diet is, the better that is for your gut health. And the contrast of that, the less diverse your diet is, the more problematic that is for your gut health. Now, diversity in your diet, this is something that I'm going to troubleshoot a little bit, because I think they had it right in some sense and then they had it wrong in another sense. So I'm going to, we're going to say that nicely. But so diversity in the diet really specifically looks at diversity of plant species in your diet, because your microbes, your entire microbiome is this variety, this very diverse collection of different bacterial populations, and they all feed on fiber specifically, but different types of fibers, and different types of fibers come from different types of plants. And if you can imagine just how expansive the amount of different plant species there are compared to animal species, first of all, but that are available to us to be able to eat and consume in a way that it's providing our microbes something to eat and consume. So when you're thinking about diversity in your diet, it's really about a diverse, expansive, volume and variety of different plants and plant foods because of those fibers that they are providing. Which brings me to the positive thing that they showed. They showed at the end, near the end of the documentary, they showed like a 60 ingredient smoothie, and it sounds like very tedious. I don't think I would ever want to follow something that had 60 ingredients. Like, no one does. Just off the top of your head, it sounds like a lot of work. But the outcome of that is that you are providing your gut with this extensive variety of all these different plant species, and it's all packed into this smoothie. And it's done in a smoothie form, not a juice form, so that way all the fiber is still there and intact. So that I thought was like cool if you're open to, buying all those ingredients and making your own smoothie at home, I guess, and depending on the taste of it, right? Otherwise, something that NF1 specifically is now introducing to the world is this gut health protocol called Reset, and it's actually composed of a wide variety of different plant species, and it's going to help provide with that high diversity of different plant species being exposed to your microbial populations. So you actually have this nice, neat tool to use to be able to introduce that diversity into your gut, in this case through a supplement, so that you don't have to necessarily make the 16-ingredient smoothie. But that takes me then to the next point, because then they also talked about diversity in your diet, and they gave a very specific example of implementing a few processed foods, or I think they're called microdosing chips or microdosing bacon. Like they literally use those examples of like potato chips and bacon. So I'm going to pull a big red flag on this, because diversity in your diet, like I said just a second ago, is about plant fibers, a diverse array of plant fibers being introduced into your gut. Diversity in your diet is not by any means introducing processed foods into your diet. They're not the same thing. So if there is, you could say this is like one big takeaway. You're not going to gain health benefits by adding processed foods to a diet that is otherwise not having processed foods. So just like, yes, that is in the most literal sense, you're not going to gain health benefits from adding processed foods. You're going to gain health benefits from adding a variety of fibers from foods. So think of that first. Now, what they were looking at with these processed foods and allowing one particular female character to, I shouldn't say character because it's a documentary, these are people, but she was having like a history of more of a psychological behaviors that were taking over her life, really, when it comes to eating behaviors and decisions behind what to eat and why she would eat certain things. So in her case, that's a very particular situation where introducing yourself to foods that you would otherwise demonize as like being completely off limits, that in that sense, it's more to help break down the psychological barrier behind trying new foods, really in general. And so in that case, it's not so much that she's gaining a health benefit physically in her gut, it's that her psychological health requires a bit more flexibility in how she views foods in general and how she introduces herself to new foods, even if it means introducing a food that would have otherwise been demonized and restricted and allowing for a little bit of it. So there's a very big difference between those. So I want to make sure that that's like put out there, that there's not instead this assumption that you have a diverse diet because you have a bunch of processed food integrated into your diet. They're not the same thing. You're going to benefit from fiber and from a lot of fiber. And one thing that I can tell you, if you are, we'll say, adding processed food into your diet, chances are that means that those processed foods may likely be taking the place of high fiber foods that you would otherwise benefit from. So that's why I would say that adding processed food into your diet is probably the last thing you ever really want to do if you truly want to promote your health, because your health depends on that high fiber intake. And that's one thing you're not going to get from processed foods. You are not going to get fiber from those potato chips or that bacon. So enough on that point, because I don't want to, belabor the point there. But so that's I think like one key distinction that hopefully helps to clear up some of that, so that way there's not misinformation being spread. And there was another cool part, kind of going on the same theme that I was just going off of the psychological benefits, where one of the people that were being, I guess, presented through this documentary, competitive eater, and he had a history of his hunger and satiety cues were broken, if you want to think of it like that. Like he was no longer registering hunger or satiety, fullness, because what he was doing really for his occupation, it's like any athlete is training. And so when he's, as a competitive eater, training, he's then having to focus and basically condition his mind to view food in a different way and to view eating in a different way. And so what I loved about how this documentary showed then, because his concern was that I think I messed up my system, basically. I think I messed up my brain, or I messed something up where I can no longer eat and feel full. I can no longer feel hunger. Like he could go days without eating without even realizing it because he couldn't feel hunger. And so his concern was that something was wrong physically with his brain, or with in some way the feedback that was going back and forth. And so what was found, though, was that his brain was still firing up the way it normally would in response to images of food and everything that you would expect from a stimulus side of things that could, I guess, confirm that, like, yeah, no, everything physically and physiologically is functioning. It's psychological. It's the fact that this individual, as like an athlete in the sport of competitive eating, has conditioned these neural pathways so strong to view food in a certain way and to view eating in a certain way that now his physiology responds to these thoughts, these different neural pathways that he's conditioned. So this, I think, is like a big like green flag for the sake of behavioral psychology, and how changing our behaviors and conditioning a certain behavior pattern helps us to form those new neural pathways. And so you can actually learn and relearn, and you can decondition and recondition. And the entire process of helping to, if you want to think about like transitioning your mindset around something, and then you have this physiological response to that mental pattern, to those neural pathways. Oh my God. So yeah, so I was really excited when they highlighted that, and they basically told him, like, there's nothing wrong. You just have to relearn everything. You basically have to decondition the learning that you have put yourself through with how you view food and eating, and relearn. So it's all about neuroplasticity at this point, and learning new behavior patterns, right, and rewiring really those neural pathways. So super cool little bonus in this documentary that they brought that up, really. Now, that's pretty much, I think I just gave like all the positives that I liked, with the one caveat about the diversity in the diet. Now, so the inevitable conclusion here is getting to the big problem that I saw, like the big gaping problem in this documentary, that everything that I just gave about the positives, I felt so strongly like this one big problem that came up just completely removed all the credibility behind all the other positive claims. It was so infuriating for me as a dietitian to watch this. So what I mean, before I get fired up here, I gotta calm down, okay? What I mean is that there was an entire scene, an entire sequence of an individual who was making her own stool supplements at home in her kitchen. So if that sounds gross, it's because it is. But the big thing that fired me up the most, because as a dietitian, this is something that you have to like stress to the end of time of how important this is. So get this, the number one cause of death or poor health or something that is disastrous to your health because of something you eat is because of foodborne illness. Foodborne illness, by large, is impacted by fecal matter, in some way contaminating the foods you eat, or surfaces around the foods you eat, or the hands that are preparing your food. This is the number one concern when it comes to overall food safety, but also, like I said, the number one reason why your food will ever harm you in any type of way is because of foodborne illness, specifically from fecal matter, from contaminating your foods or the surfaces that touch your foods or the hands that prepare your foods. And this documentary showed an entire scene, an entire sequence of an individual literally taking stool and using kitchen equipment and creating stool supplements at home with no disclaimer at all that this is like a major biohazard. There's nothing at all around, I guess, protecting the public from this being seen as completely normal. And this to me is a big problem, because we as just humans over the last century and a half, we have made so much progress in public health just from basic sanitation and plumbing practices, from really standardizing how we view sanitation and to really zero in on proper plumbing structures and keeping everything completely sanitary, completely separate. And even now, you still continually will see news reports of different outbreaks, E. coli outbreaks, and food recalls that have to happen because that food is now dangerous to consume because it has in some way been contaminated with bacteria that lives inside of the gut, that bacteria that is being exposed because of fecal matter that is in some way contaminating the foods. Oh my goodness. Like I said, I just got fired up because everything else that came out of this documentary as a positive is so quickly overshadowed by this big glaring problem that this documentary, in my opinion, needs to be removed from public circulation until they can remove that scene and that sequence, because that is the biggest, like, if there is any big liability that Netflix just placed on their shoulders, it's the fact that they just put out something to the public, to the entire world to see, that is like the most dangerous thing that you could ever do. So, someone leave a comment. Everyone leave comments about how disturbing that is, because it's something that I hope is a learning experience for the sake of Netflix and their documentaries, that they are really zeroing in on what is it that we want to promote and why. Because in this case, there is no benefit from doing that. It is 100% the most harmful thing that you could do. So, all that being said, take the positives as positives, because there really are positives there with learning and understanding how the gut works and how to start taking care of the foods that you are eating, how to really start being mindful, really, of the foods you're taking in and why you're taking in those foods, and whether or not they are helping to promote health within your gut specifically, or whether or not they may be taking the place of foods that could promote your health. And then, like I said, with that big old spiel I just gave, the very strong importance about sanitation and appropriate sanitation practices, and the fact that understanding, really learning about the gut through stool, for instance, should not in any way, shape, or form be translated directly into not only the space where you're eating or the foods you're eating, but it should not be in the equation at all at home. Like, it needs to be kept specifically under the very strong, strict umbrella of research and very high sanitation practices. Otherwise, if there is an assessment that you want to give yourself at home that is safe, completely safe for you to do, that there's no risk of anything going wrong, no risk of contamination, that saliva test that I explained earlier is going to help you to identify the state of that mucosal lining within your gut and whether or not it's degraded or not. So that's an easy at-home assessment that you can do. And there's no risk of food contamination or messiness with that one. But hopefully you all enjoyed that. Leave a comment below if you enjoyed that. And if you have any other feedback from that documentary as well, I would love to hear it. Otherwise, thank you all. Take care. Bye-bye.